Welcome back, everyone, from our little break. So welcome to the Parapsychology Australia online event brought to you by the Australian Institute of Parapsychological Research, or the AIPR, our sixth one. So we've come to our last speaker. We have the wonderful Debra Lynne Katz. We're very fortunate that she could set some time apart to volunteer to speak to us. She is a very talented remote viewer, clairvoyant medium. She's got a master's in social work and also a PhD in psychology. And she is the director or president of the International School of Clairvoyance. She has focused on helping thousands of students. So she's got online courses to develop abilities to perceive information at a distance through symbols and pictures and images. So that's remote viewing. She has personally participated in thousands of hours of intuitive-based sessions herself and observed and monitored these many hours of others doing similar work and approaches. She's also an author of several books. You can go on her website. I will put it in the link. So today she's going to talk about exploring the visual content of consciousness, taking a deep dive into imagery within intentional remote viewing, clairvoyant and mediumship sessions versus spontaneous PSI experiences.
Well, I want to thank Joyce here and all of you for being here tonight and giving me this opportunity to join you here. I'm joining you from Oregon, USA. But really my heart is in Australia because my only son lives in Coffin Bay, South Australia, with my two grandchildren. And so I really hope to make Australia my second home. Someday, my son doesn't quite realize that yet, but Mom is going to be showing up there more than he realizes. So I am going to be talking about one of my not just favorite topics, but topics that I'm totally obsessed with, and that's imagery and visualization. And in addition to all of my clairvoyant work, I have been also very involved in remote viewing and remote viewing research, and I'm the president of the International Remote Viewing Association at the moment. And so I split my time, really, I think of my day job doing clairvoyant work with clients, but then my part-time work and love and research is in the field of remote viewing. And I'm going to be talking about these different modalities. A lot of times when I do presentations, usually I'm focusing more on remote viewing when I'm speaking to a professional audience because it kind of lends itself, or a scientific audience because it lends itself a little bit more to the research end of things. But today I'm really going to combine topics. And also, not only do I want this to be a presentation, but I really intend this to be a workshop because while it's interesting to hear about other people's imagery and visions, really ultimately what's most interesting is exploring your own. And so I've got some short exercises designed to help you with that. And let me just move over this here. And so this really is based on an informal case collective approach incorporating microphenomenology. And I know that is quite a mouthful. I recently spent some time with researchers at the University of Virginia Department of Perceptual Studies, and they're doing some preliminary explorations of remote viewers to see what's happening in their brain when they're correct about a target and when they're incorrect. So we spent a few days together, and in addition to hooking me up to the EEG while I did about 6 or 7 remote viewing targets, they also practiced something that they've been training in, which is called microphenomenology. And basically, this is interviewing a person to find out what's happening on a very like moment-to-moment basis. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of an exercise of your own visuals because it's going to help both help you to realize that you do visualize, and also help you to really start to pay very close attention to all those visualizations. It seems strange that we're visualizing throughout our day, throughout our entire life, but how much time do we actually spend exploring the contents of our visualizations? And it's really pretty literally mind-blowing to think about how we're so close to our thoughts, and yet we just don't really spend time to analyze them too much, or not, most people don't. So if you say these things about yourself, by the end, I hope you will reconsider. So many times people come to a class or a lecture and they say, I know you want to teach me to be clairvoyant, but I'm not. I'm not good at visualizing. I can't intentionally use my sight. It just happens. So some people are having a lot of spontaneous experiences, or at least some, but they can't make it happen. And then there are some people who know that they have visuals, that they get information through visions and pictures and colors, but they just can't say how it works, how it happens. And then a lot of people will say that they only feel, and feeling intuitively would be referred to as clairsentience or being empathic. And a lot of people become aware that they're sensing other people's emotions, body sensations, but they don't really know what to do beyond that, and they don't feel like they're getting visuals. And I do want to say, when I'm using the word clairvoyance, I am being very specific. I know that some parapsychologists do use the term clairvoyance as a general ESP term, but I really think it's important to be specific with our definitions. And so I'm really talking about receiving information through images and pictures. And we'll talk a little bit about why it's helpful to be to use your visual imagery to access information at a distance, as opposed to your other abilities, which are also very helpful too. Each of them has their importance and function, but clairvoyance, well, I'll just say clairvoyance puts, when you're being visual, it's taking you out of the part of your brain of when you're being logical. So it's, your logic sometimes is a little bit too close in your mind when you're just getting like downloads or inputs. And not to say that those aren't valuable, they're really essential if you're going to get information and in a useful manner. But it can be really hard to tell, because if you just like suddenly have a thought. Now, if a thought is very different from what you were already thinking or what you knew, or it just intruded, then it's easier to trust that. But what I found is, especially when I'm working with students and maybe I can tell they're going into their logical mind, I'll bring them to a visual place. And then this tends to get them out of that logic place. So clairvoyance, that's just one of many reasons why it's helpful. Okay, so what I want to do first is have you do an exercise where you discover that you already do have imagery within that you're not always aware of. And this is not earth-shattering, but I want you to see how easy it is to find visuals. So what I'd like everyone to do is close your eyes, and this will only take a few moments or a few minutes, and just close your eyes. And then I'm going to say a word. And when I say the word, I want you to force yourself to notice what image comes up in relation to this word. And after the first one, it'll make more sense. So just close your eyes, and then I'm going to say the word yes, yes. And just pay attention to what visual comes up. You might see a picture, you might see movement, or you might see a color. And why don't you all type into the chat a description, and try to be descriptive of whatever you see. Like if you see movement, which direction? If you see like a smiley face, then describe that. So just type into the chat what you're noticing. For example, when I just said yes, I saw like a yellow balloon rise up, and I also saw a smiley face. So if everyone could type into the chat what you just noticed, and we'll run through these pretty quick. Okay, so Brett saw a dog excited about having a ball thrown at it. Someone else saw a white light ball, top left corner. Someone else saw a TV quiz show, a red shaped star. Okay, terrific. So just get your comments in quickly. And now we're going to go to another word. This time we're going to say no. No. And what do you visualize with the word no? And when you put it into the chat, just put the word that I just said, so we know we could delineate it from the yeses. So I see someone crossing arms like a cross, a clenched fist in blackness, no, moving backwards, a solid wall. Okay, these are terrific. A mass of dead bodies being roughly shoved into a trench pit. So now this is great because this is representative of what the range of what people will have. So some people have like more complex scenes, dramatic. Harold said his ex-teacher. So sometimes we're pulling from memory. Sometimes we're pulling from like a shared kind of archetypal sense of words, because we're used to seeing different signs and symbols together. So there'll be some shared imagery, and then there'll be individual imagery. Let's just do one more. Let's do father. So just close your eyes again and father. And then just go with the very first image, and we're just getting you used to describing. So father, and see if you could be really descriptive. So if you see like a man, then what does the man look like? And again, some of these will be dependent like on maybe your own relationship with your father or yourself as a father. Okay, great. So, and some people are seeing like Joyce saw a cartoon drawing of a kid and mother holding a baby and a man. A large teddy bear with tartan bow tie. So again, some of these are more complex, some are simple. Did anyone have an emotion with this word? Anyone have any emotions? Now, we won't have time to do a whole bunch of words, but I oftentimes do this exercise with my class and with one of my clairvoyant classes. And this, again, just helps to get the visuals flowing. And we'll do words, we won't have time here now, but like we'll do words like success and failure and love and hate. And pretty much like when I do hate, like you could just feel the energy drop, and people start to get upset even just from saying a single word. So our visuals are not only just about the visuals, but they produce emotions in us. And I'm always blown away because I think, well, my gosh, if we could have so much going on with a single word and also emotions along with the visual for a single word, then it's really no wonder that people have such a hard time getting along when they add in so many words together in their conversations. And, oftentimes we think we're talking the same language, we're all speaking English, but then our words are really about the pictures behind the words are sometimes so different and so emotionally exciting to us. And so this is also similar when you're using your clairvoyance. Now here, this was just, I said a word, you intellectually knew what the word was. But when using your intuitive abilities to get information about other people or other things, you are the visuals, the way that you observe those visuals is very, very similar when intuition is entering through. So pay attention to that. Like, again, did your visuals come in with color, movement? Some of them, might have been vivid, but some of them were just kind of just fleeting, like you barely knew what you saw. And that is very representative of clairvoyant images, which we could define visualization as when you're having images through intention and where you know what you're going to visualize, or you have some, and then, excuse me, in this case, you didn't quite know what you were going to visualize. And that's what I think is interesting about this too, right? Like you didn't plan on it. For most of you, you just waited to see what came up and then you reported it. So even though this wasn't really a psychic exercise, it was an exercise in that your subconscious has a lot going on that you're not even aware of. And when we're being psychic, the psychic information enters through the subconscious until it enters into our awareness. Now, what we know from studies with blind people who have never seen, they do visualize, and I've been reading studies on this, blind people who have never seen before. They do visualize, but it's not in images per se. It's movements, positionings, relationships between things, and then hearing and sensing and spatiality. Also, it's not necessarily that they don't have images, but they wouldn't necessarily know what they were looking at. For example, if they've never seen a red tomato, it is possible that they're having those in their dreams, but they wouldn't know that's what it was. And so this is, I'm going to be showing you some examples from remote viewing sessions. This was one of mine, not a perfect depiction of the photo, but and when I talk about remote viewing sessions, these are all done in a blind manner. So the remote viewer will only know a target number. They will have no idea what the picture is, and it could be really anything in the whole universe. So this could have been like an outside location. It just happened to be an inside location, two figures. And so in this case, many times myself and other viewers will get positioning. So the body is turning to the left, the head is turning, or emotions can show through. It's a little hard to see this picture. It's a really old picture. But they have very expressive eyes. There's also little items on the shelf behind them. So it's interesting. So it's fascinating to see what actually shows up in a session. So positions is, and a lot of times there's the question, is a viewer describing are they describing the picture itself, or are they describing the actual location? And so sometimes we can tell that because if you're just describing the overall location, then you're not going to necessarily like be able to say like there's, a person standing looking towards the left, or there's something lower down in the picture. But a lot of times we find a combination between viewers are describing the picture and the actual location. And some of that is dependent on how they're tasking themselves. Are they intending to send their attention over to the actual location, or are they intending to send their attention over to the picture? Sometimes one will happen over the other spontaneously, but through intention, we could have different results. Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to do here, and let's see. Okay, this next thing, quick exercise in moving, entropy, images, positions, orientations. So I'd like you to close your eyes again. And it's not that you can't do these exercises with your eyes open, it's just it'll help you to focus better. And I would like you to see an image of, let's say, a hot air balloon, and make this like a bright red hot air balloon. And you can, why don't you start it off on the ground and see it rising up? Maybe someone lights a fire in the basket, and then the balloon starts to rise up, and it rises up higher and higher. And then someone takes an arrow, and the arrow hits the balloon, and the balloon explodes. And now let's do another. I'd like you to imagine a bright red apple, and let this apple be like right out in front of you. Like imagine as if you could touch your third eye above your two eyes, and then right out in front of you, about say 3 meters away or 6 meters away, doesn't really matter. Imagine that there is a bright red apple. And then right out of and see the apple, like see a little leaf on it. It's very red and shiny. Maybe it has some dew on it. And then right out of your third eye, shoot a flaming arrow at that apple. And the second it hits it, let it explode. And then let's just do something simpler. Why don't you now see like a blackboard, and then you could write your name with very bright chalk. Just write your name across that blackboard. And then you could take an eraser and erase your name. And then you can open up your eyes again. So these are just initial exercises in getting you to practice to visualize. And we're making use of the concept of entropy. One of the things, again, that we notice when in our both in remote viewing and clairvoyant work, and let me just say, again, when I use the word clairvoyant work or clairvoyant reading, I'm talking about a practice of sitting with another person and getting information about them. But a lot of times they could be in person, but these days it's oftentimes they're on the phone or on the computer, but without any visuals, so that you can actually get information about them, but not have your logic or visual cues in the way. So that's what I mean by clairvoyance. And then with remote viewing, the target would not usually be present with you on the phone or asking to be to be read. Instead, it would be a distant target, like a location, an object. It could be a person of interest, but not someone who's usually like wanting information about themselves. So with both of those, when it comes to our visualizations, the movement, the change of positioning or relationships between objects are very useful in this work. And so if you do wish to be intuitive with your visuals, starting off doing visualization exercises will help. And the thing is too, you're a lot more likely to notice an image as it's moving. When it moves, you can focus. So if I had just said, just create a bunch of images, well, first of all, it's like we kind of have to get rid of the images, or we start just our minds just start to, it's kind of like a table that's filled up with too much stuff. It just starts to get cluttered. So the destroying action of it creating an image and then destroying it, that helps to clear, but it also helps you to pay attention. So, and sometimes the more dramatic you make it, as far as brighter colors or having them explode, the more you'll be able to pay attention to them. So just something to practice. Okay, one more exercise. Right now, I'd like you to close your eyes again. And this is where the microphenomenology comes in. So I'm assuming all of you have a refrigerator in your house or apartment, wherever you live. So I'd like you to, in your imagination, take a trip to your refrigerator and basically just remember, what does your refrigerator look like? And we're not going to care about if you're, accurate or not with your memory. Just go with it. So imagine that you're standing in front of your own refrigerator and you look at it and look at the handle and imagine you're putting your hand on the handle to open it. And then you're opening it. And then look at one of the shelves. And what is the shelf made out of? What material is the shelf made out of? And you could reach out and touch the shelf to notice how it feels. And as you do that, if you put your finger on the shelf, what happens? There might be some condensation. And how crowded is your refrigerator right now? I'd like you to take out one item and take out that item, any one of your choice. And then hold that item and look at the front of it. What shape is it? How big is it? And notice how much of that item are you visualizing right now? Like, do you see it in its entirety? Or are you just looking at it from one angle? Are you seeing a whole picture of it? Or are you just seeing kind of part of the shape? What would you need to do in order to see the back of that image or the back of that item? Like, turn it. Do you need to turn it, or can you just suddenly see the back? And if you look at the back, do you see the whole shape, or do you just see part of the shape? Is there any writing on it? And then you can put that back into the refrigerator. And what does it look like as you set it down on the shelf? How much room does it take up on that shelf? And then you can withdraw your hand. And then as you close it, put your hand back on the handle. And notice, how much of the handle are you seeing right now? Are you seeing the whole handle or just part? And do you really see, do you see the color of it or not really? And then you could close it. And then you can imagine you're coming back here to your body. And then you could open your eyes. So just doing exercises like this where you're paying minute attention. And I'm just curious if you could write into the chat, did you feel like you were seeing like the whole item or just parts of it? Like, what parts were you observing? Just if everyone could write into the chat just a little bit about what you just noticed. And then we could read each other's, and just like a couple sentences. And so Joyce says just parts, handle, one shelf. Harold says the whole shape. Sean says parts. You saw the whole kale item wrapped in plastic. Yeah, a lot of times we will just be able, we kind of have these expectations with our visualizations. And a lot of beginning students, they get really frustrated because they'll say like, well, I am kind of seeing this, but like not in its entirety. And we're going to talk more about this, like some patterns. And we'll look back at your, well, let's see. Some people, yeah, some had the whole thing front and then back. So you're not always seeing the front and the back at the same time. You're just seeing parts. Okay, great. So patterns in training and development across different modalities. We're going to talk about that here. Oh, wait. Sorry. Okay. Bring your psychic abilities out to play. Elevate your imagination. The imagination is not just your imagination. It is a serious and vital visual interface system between yourself and the outside world. Until we elevate our imaginations in importance, we're not going to get very far. And I don't just mean like, be proud that you have an imagination. Your imagination is the fabric by which intuitive information flows through. If you can't let it come through your imagination, you won't be able to be clairvoyant. Intentional side, patterns in training and development across different intuitive modalities. So observations of visuals, they follow the rules of our normal perception and attention most of the time, but they're not the same as seen with our eyes most of the time. Probably as you have now done a few exercises here, you probably notice that while you were getting visuals, some were a lot stronger than others or a lot more vivid, but they still weren't exactly the same as if your eyes were open. Now, of course, there could be outliers there, but most people say that there's a difference. And I find that when students have the expectation that it should be the same as with their eyes, that's where they get stuck. And a lot of times they'll say, I just can't do this, I can't visualize. But I oftentimes come to find that they are visualizing in the more subtle way, but it's not conforming to their expectations. Okay, now here's some things that we need to be aware of. We can't usually just see only one thing and avoid all else. Now, this is many times a problem in remote viewing. So for example, if I have you look at this picture here and look closely at it, and if I say I only want you to look at the glass in the middle that has the cinnamon sticks, I only want you to see that, and I don't want you to see anything else in this picture. How many of you can do that? How many of you can avoid noticing that there's many things around? Probably no one. Maybe if you get your face like super close to it, you can do that. But otherwise, there's many things in the picture, a lot of jars, a lot of different shapes. There's actually a person behind, and even the you can't see it so much here, but the person's blurred out because the photographer was really trying to get you to focus on what was in the front, and so blurred out was what was in the back. So now translate this to a remote viewing session where a remote viewer is given a target, again, could be anything in the whole world, and they are, or they may be told like, view an object, the target's an object, or they might be told it's a location, but then they're expected to just see just see the one jar. Like a lot of times I've had people assign me targets like that, like, describe what's in the box, but then the researcher will have the box on top of a desk that's filled with other items. And he didn't even, it's not that he was trying to trick me, it's just he didn't make time to clear off his desk. And in the background, there's like a cityscape you could see out the window. And this is the picture they send to the remote viewers. And, then they're surprised that you described everything else in their office except for the, one thing that you're supposed to, or maybe, all together. But they were like, oh, well, the target wasn't all the jars, it was just one. So this is something that we have to be really aware of when we're assigning targets to people, and it can be confusing. I'm jumping around here a little bit. Efficiency in dream images. There are one activity that you can do that is very similar to remote viewing, but it's would be referred to as dream ESP, and this would be dreaming future feedback photos. And these two examples are part of a year-long study I did with Dale Graff and some other people. Dale's one of the foremost ESP dreamers in the world. You may have heard of him. And he's actually the person who taught me how to do this. So in our project, once a week, we would have a photograph that our project manager was going to show us the next day, and we had to dream images that would match the picture. Dale had this is a whole other topic, but Dale has so many incredible examples. This is his at the bottom. And here you could see, while not perfect, he drew his drawing here upon waking was this rectangle, and this here was the photograph that was the feedback photo. And then the top one is my example. And I was really surprised when I started to do this activity because just probably like the rest of yourselves, usually dreaming, you may have so many dreams during the night and so many images, you would think it would be really hard to pinpoint something to put on your paper that then could match the photo the next day. But I found as soon as I started to do this in a formal project that my mind produced sometimes just a very short, clear, simple image that turned out to be a really good match to the target. So this really showed me, drove home that our subconscious really responds to instructions and to requests, especially when we write things down and go through kind of a ritualistic, formal process of weekly trials. Now, the other important thing about both, I would say, our visuals, but all of our psychic functioning is that psi is embodied. And what this means is, and I'd say maybe not all the time, but if we're going after information, especially in remote viewing where you're trying to describe a distant location or object, you will oftentimes have more success if you go at it from different angles. And this is a rather famous example. You might have seen this before, but Ingo Swann, who is known as the father of remote viewing and who developed a methodology of remote viewing called controlled remote viewing, Ingo had this experience where this was when he was working at the American Society for Psychical Research in the late 1960s. This was actually before the US government remote viewing program started, which he then joined. But they were doing out-of-body research in those days, him and Janet Mitchell, and she would lay him down in a bed and put a shelf above the bed about 10 feet above, and he would be all strapped into EEG equipment, other monitoring things, and she'd be watching him in the other room. So she could see it, she'd know immediately if he got up. But there was a shelf about 10 feet above the head with different objects put on it. And each week he would have to describe these different objects. And two interesting things came out of this. One was that she noticed learning curves where with each different kind of object or target type, whether it was like letters or just like stuffed animals, or some things were two-dimensional, some things were three-dimensional. She observed learning curves, meaning that, at first he wasn't doing so good. And then after several attempts, he was doing really well. And so in those days, they didn't even know that people could improve with practice. They really thought psychic abilities were just a gift that someone had. Now, the other thing that they were blown away by was this one example where there was a 7-Up can, a soda can, that was put on top of the shelf. And when Ingo did his session, and he felt like he was looking at hieroglyphics, and you could see this picture here. This was exactly what he wrote. He said letters, maybe Arabic letters, and he drew this on the piece of paper. So he saw an image and then he drew it. And when he saw that it was, and you can see what it was at the bottom here, it's a little hard to tell, but that's actually a can, a tin can with the words 7-Up on it. When he first saw it, he thought, gosh, I really bombed this. I didn't do well. And then the researcher took his paper and put it upside down, and he saw he had actually drawn the words 7-Up, just like the can. And he was so blown away. In his book, Natural ESP, he describes how he was going home on the train, and he just had to like sit down on the steps before he even got on the train, and he was just in shock. And what he was in shock about was that a part of him could have perceived this upside down and drawn it, where his conscious mind had no idea what he was doing or talking about. And this was really critical in his development of his methodologies as he went along, because he also incorporated working with paper and not just verbally reporting what a person sees, but seeing the importance of writing things down. Because sometimes your body and your hand will write things down that your mind hasn't even seen or perceived, but you could still like get an image down. Distortions, turning one thing into another. This is very common in remote viewing sessions. This was part of a study that I ran where we were testing out how remote viewers did with targets where they were objects against either objects in logical environments, illogical environments, or against white backgrounds. And we wanted to see if they would have an easier time with different types. And I thought this was a really great depiction of the target. So the drawing here is what the viewer drew. This was the actual target. And you can see that they had a lot of similar elements, but it looks like, I think this tree sticking out here, they falsely interpreted it as a hand. Also, they didn't quite get the perspective exactly right. Here you could see the bottom, not the top, but they had a sense of perspective. And that is oftentimes in a remote viewing session, if something is more like boxy or three-dimensional, or let's say it's like a bird's eye perspective, that will also oftentimes come through to myself as a viewer and to others that I know. So we won't necessarily always get the perspective right, but we'll know like, okay, this is like a wider range perspective. So spatiality is, this is really speaking to our different senses. And a lot of times we just get focused on our 6 physical senses, but we don't think of like our sense of spatiality or relationships or how we move through the environment as a sense. And we really, these senses are as important for us as the visual and hearing. This was from that same project. At first glance, you might be like, oh, well, that doesn't look like a castle. But if you take a close look, you could see there's like bricks here, and there's straight lines, and there's curves. And so it appears that the viewer did get elements, but in this case, like really, really messed them up. So this is showing us that the viewer really did not understand what this object was supposed to be. But this really gets into the phenomenology of what makes an object, whatever we're calling it. Like, what is that really a castle? Or is it just a depiction of a castle, but not, what makes anything whatever it is that we give the name to it. And so viewers are sometimes separating out the meaning of it and instead just getting like the characteristics. And then also viewers often see parts of a whole. Actually, something wrong with that image. I'm just going to skip that. Okay, and then images are rarely, if ever, exact to the picture. So this was one of my sessions, and I was happy with this because in my mind, the image that I saw, and again, the image I saw was a mound of silvery fish moving together. It was a mound, but I kind of thought of them as like, maybe I didn't know where the mound was situated. I didn't see the fish in the water, but I knew there were many fish. This was my picture up here I drew. I knew they were silvery, and I knew they were still flopping. So those were my visuals. And when I saw this, I was like, oh, that's cool. But I didn't see the people, and I didn't get the water. And so it wasn't a perfect match, and it almost never is. So many times remote viewers, even if they did a really good job, they named the target, they saw lots of features, they'll still feel a little disappointed, like, oh, that wasn't like 100% of what was in my mind. Once in a while, it will be, but there's almost always some kind of a distortion there. And then it just depends, do they manage to describe it so the description, matches it pretty well. Now, this was also from that same project where we had some targets with objects in strange backgrounds. And for this, sometimes I like to give viewers pictures that would just never make sense in a million years. And, as opposed to like a popular tourist location where, if you give someone Stonehenge or the Taj Mahal as a target, there's a good chance that, again, even though they're totally blind, it could be any location in the world. If they see it, they might recognize it, because we recognize these iconic images like, oh, there's a bunch of rectangles piled up in different ways in a field of green grass. Maybe that's Stonehenge. So they have a chance of naming the target. But in this case, a fish smoking a cigarette, that's very strange. But you can see here that they did some pretty interesting renditions of these shapes, match like quite well. And someone said it reminds me of a whale, spongy like gold metal, sticky, wet, moist life form. So they actually did get a life form. Now, this is something that will happen, I would say, this happens more when you're reading people, that as you're going along, you, like, let's say someone asks about their relationship with the guy they just met. And then you're reminded of your brother who has maybe like just crashed his car and wears glasses and has a big nose, let's say. And so then it may very well turn out that the person that your client is asking about just crashed his car and has glasses and a big nose. So it's the remembering of your brother or having an image of your brother that gives you the clues. And so that more oftentimes I would say happens in reading a person than in remote viewing sessions. But in this example here, one of the remote viewing groups that I've been a part of for a long time, there's about 6 of us. We've been working together for about 10 years. And our project manager, Nancy, at the time lived in Ohio. And this was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, where several college students were murdered in a house right off of campus. And because our project manager lived there, she was contacted by a law enforcement officer who wanted to know if, as remote viewers, we could help get some information to help them figure out who had done this horrible crime. And so I was a viewer, and during my session, I had an image of this actor, James Franco, who some of you might remember. He was in the early Spider-Man films. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, I just had an image of James Franco in the Spider-Man movie, except in my image, he was not wearing like a very nice clothes. And so what I did was I went online and I looked for a picture that matched my memory of him and my image. And then I put that into my session and sent it to my project manager. And then a month later, someone was apprehended, Brian Kohlberger. So they're still going through trial, but it really sounds like he's the one who did it. And you could see there's a pretty good match between how they look. So this is something I've started to depend on more and more because sometimes I feel limited in I'm not a great artist, and it's much easier and kind of fun to do this. So my subconscious, I found over the last few years, is starting to respond to the request to at some point come up with a memory that I could then make use of. Images are often very simplistic, but representative of the target. So here you can see that there's not a complete rendition of the picture, but some targets also are much easier because they are more cohesive. Like here you have a bunch of circles together with straight lines. But sometimes targets, let's say of a building, may have multiple shapes, complex shapes, and then it makes it a lot harder to even be able to describe what you're looking at. Clairvoyant images are archetypal, open source, coming from within and also influenced or colored by those we are reading. So over the years, I started to notice patterns, and not just myself, but many other people who do the same practice. So for example, if say like a stranger comes to me, or to another clairvoyant, and we don't know them, we haven't talked to them before, and usually they'll just say their name and we'll go through some processes, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But usually, if the person, let's say, has a great sense of humor, they're really funny, then our visuals will be funny. Like we'll get cartoon pictures that make us laugh. If the person is very dramatic, we'll get more dramatic images. If the person is, let's say, very not creative, or maybe very just logical and doesn't have like a whole lot going on visually for themselves, then our visuals will be, maybe we won't barely even be getting visuals for that session. So we've noticed a trend, we can't prove it, but I'd say we definitely noticed a trend that our visuals can be impacted. Also, we'll get symbols that may have no meaning to us as the clairvoyant, but are very meaningful to that person. And so it does appear like there's an interface between one's own symbology and the other person that they're interacting with. Again, I can't prove that, but just notice that trend. I want to say with our, again, this is getting back to how visuals come in. If we have an expectation that a visual should be a certain way, that information should be a certain way, and we move into judgment. Now we're no longer focused on what we're supposed to be focused on, whether the person or the target. Now our attention has gone to our judgments and our imperfections. We're distracting ourselves, and now we lose our images. So it's essential that however intuitive information comes in, that it's accepted, that that's how it works. It's not that it's not working right. It's that it's not working according to our expectations. Now, one of the things I wanted to do was come up with a classification of visual imagery. And you can think back to a little bit of what we already did here. Were your images vague? Were they kind of somewhere in the middle, like moderate, like where you could say, yeah, I did really perceive this, this shape and this color, or they could be super realistic. A lot of people starting out, again, like are, thinking that all images are supposed to be super realistic, but most are not. I would say 90% will be initially pretty subtle. And it's essential that you trust and communicate these when they come in, or you won't be able to move forward. Now, this is true regardless of the modality: clairvoyant reading, remote viewing, mediumship. If something comes in, no matter how vague or how subtle, it's essential to do your best to describe what just happened, the way it happened. Don't edit it, because there's a process, there's actually something that happens as you communicate. It's like you're getting more and more focused as you're having to communicate. And if you start to edit in your mind, like, oh, well, I'll say this, but I won't say this because I'm sure about this, but I'm not sure about this. If you start to do that, now you've lost the connection. But the more precisely you're trying to describe what you're getting, and you're asking, like, okay, well, maybe I saw the top of this, but I didn't see the bottom of it. Let me look there. Now you're getting more and more dialed in and more information. So you want to, no matter, even if you think like, I just totally made this up, it's important to just go with it and share. Just reading this here. Images will oftentimes be cartoony. Sometimes they'll be like emojis, sometimes they'll barely be colored, similar to when you were doing those visualizations. Now, then some images are of an intermediate level of vividness and clarity. A number will be clearer than others, and eventually what seemed very vague will be less so as your confidence and familiarity with images grows. So a lot of this does take getting used to. So rather than just sensing a man, like initially you might kind of get like an overview, like, oh, there's a man here, or I kind of feel a man's energy, or I kind of got it. I knew enough. I couldn't really see a man, but I kind of like maybe saw someone kind of tall, but I didn't see the whole body. But over time, you will start to get more clarity. And now the third kind is vivid, very realistic, where your images look lifelike. And I've categorized these into two different ones. The first one is intrusive. Now, this will happen both when you're, this can happen for people like just when they're in their twilight time, like of going to sleep or waking up or meditating. So when you're in a deeper state, although this could happen even if you're just like reading a book or just relaxing, and suddenly having an intrusive picture come in. And just, I'd like for all of you to think about, have you ever had like an intrusive visual come in, and under what circumstances were they? And if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat, that would be great. I'm going to just keep reading through this here. But intrusive images are sometimes extremely realistic, lifelike, colorful. And these follow some characteristics. And again, not just for myself, but for probably hundreds of people that I've talked to about this. Some people get these a lot. Some people will only get these on rare occasion. Now, these are also mediums will more oftentimes in a session have these than remote viewers or even clairvoyants, because mediums are obviously the goal of mediumship is to tune into external spirits. And I believe that this is a sign of external, of information coming in a more external way. Sometimes the imagery will feel like it's pushing or slamming or dropping in. It'll feel invasive. It could be crashing in, or it could form like pixels, like the person's face is pixelated. And at first it's like, oh, what's going on here? I'm seeing all these pixels. And then it'll form into an actual face. This can be sudden and unexpected. Occasionally, and now I've only had this twice, and this is why I put up an image of an alien face, because only twice in my life where I was doing something else. One time I was doing a reading for someone and it suddenly switched. Another time I was doing a remote viewing session, same thing. Suddenly, an alien face appeared, and it's just like with big eyes, not colorful like this, but more gray. And it was very menacing and basically saying like, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be here. And it interacted. It was the same feeling you would get if you were watching your TV and suddenly the characters turned their heads or came on and started to address you directly. Very odd. That doesn't happen very often though. But it is common. I'll give you one example here. And this is why I know this isn't just coming from one's imagination. We could just talk about this alone for hours. But when I was in my early training, clairvoyant training at a place called the Berkeley Psychic Institute in Berkeley, California, we were in a room and there was a group of us meditating. They used to make us meditate for 30 minutes before we could go into class or go into a practice session. So we'd come into the reception room and I'll be sitting there. Well, I was just sitting there. I was like pretty new. And suddenly this image, it was like slammed in, it came from far away. And that's the other thing, like images don't usually feel like they're coming from far away, moving towards you. Usually, again, it's just like if what you guys already did before, it probably didn't feel like something slammed into your head. But in this instance, there was a picture of a male's genitals, and it was like the genitals just like slammed into my head. And I almost fell off my chair. I was like, oh my God, what was that? And I didn't say anything to anyone because I didn't, at that point, I didn't even know anyone else in the room. And suddenly I heard someone laugh behind me. And then I heard someone else laugh. And then someone just said out loud, okay, who did that? Who just threw that sex picture? And they said that because they got the same thing. And then when we talked later, like at least 4 people got the same picture. The same thing happened to 4 different people. So this is something that is a lot more common than you would think. And part of the process of clairvoyant reading and healing, part of the training is to do group readings together. And so a lot of times you'll have experiences like that, where one reader might not say what they're experiencing, but someone else says it first. And I've had that's one way you can get your confidence level up. There's many experiences like that. But some people get a lot of intrusive imagery, and then we can sometimes get correlation with the content. And sometimes it can be accompanied by body
Deborah,
sensations.
just need to
Yes.
interrupt. Sorry, just a couple of minutes before Q&A. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize the time. So we'll just, do we have about 5 more minutes? Or,
That's fine. Yep, 5 more minutes.
okay. let's see what else we have here. So, okay, vivid, realistic, lifelike. So this would be bilocating. So this is another, I'd say, in addition to intrusive images, sometimes, and now we can't say this is for sure happening, but there are times in a remote viewing session, and this is quite rare for most viewers. Some have this more than others, but all of a sudden something will change and you will see things so vividly. And I picked this picture of wheat with the little grains in it because one of my experiences of this was I was suddenly, it was as if I was flying over a wheat field and I could see every grain of the wheat. Another time flying over a beach and every grain of sand. This has only happened maybe like 3 or 4 times in the say 13 years I've been doing remote viewing. But and other viewers say the same thing. It's rare, but something will suddenly switch. And what we suspect is that a part of our, at least our consciousnesses, you might say spirit, soul, whatever, there's a part of us that has gone somewhere else. This is kind of what we all live for, to have experiences like this, because it's really fun. It usually only lasts a few moments. And it will usually give you a correct aspect of the target. Like when this is happening, you could be pretty confident that you're going to be correct about it being at the target location. But the problem is because it's so interesting and exciting, you might make a much bigger deal about it. So for example, like maybe, yes, there's a wheat field, but there might be a building, and maybe the building was really supposed to be what you were describing. So, you got the wheat field right. But if you just start to perseverate on that in your description and you miss the whole building, then it's not really useful if, they wanted you to get information about the building. Images are sometimes alone and accompanied by our other senses. And I'm just gonna, we won't have time for the rest. I have a lot more here, but here's just some more examples. I just wanted to show, and then I'll end with this, is one way, a lot of times people and researchers don't realize that your sketches and your information can develop once you get an image, if you go back and explore it from different perspectives. So a lot of times people think, well, you either got an image or not, and it's over. But no, if a student turns in a page like this, I could say, you know what, I want you to go back. I'm not going to tell you what the target was. I want you to go back and I want you to explore the top of this building. And either they can do this by putting their pen at the top of the image and telling themselves, I want the information that exists at the top to flow to me, or I can send my consciousness over to the location to the top, and I'm going to pretend I'm standing on top of the building or touching whatever this is. I think it's a building. I'm going to touch it. And now, or I'm going to look down on it, or I'm going to hug it, or I'm going to listen to it. And then I'm going to let new flows of information to come in. And this actually really works if you could let go of what you saw before. So this is where sketches will develop into more advanced sketches. So you're not just stuck with like the initial, you end up getting more and more descriptions so that you can, I was just seeing what else I had here. Yeah, so you can really get a whole picture of the scene. And even though viewers tend to just get parts and pieces of a target, what you could do at the end of this, when they're all done, you could tell them that they're required to take all their different pieces and at least do their best to try to assemble them into one picture called a compilation picture. And so in advanced training, that's what students have to do. And it could feel like almost impossible. Like, how am I going to take all these little pieces I got on each page and put them together? But sometimes they really can do a remarkable job assembling it all together. So skipping over a lot, but at this point, I will just say we should end here. These are a couple of my books that contain information about these topics. And I have to give a little plug for IRVA, the International Remote Viewing Association. We have 2 conferences coming up here soon. So check out IRVA. You'll learn a lot. And both about research and education.